Absolutely.
David Magee, thank you for joining us. They say in Hollywood that you should never make a movie with children, animals, and water. And here you are writing a script that couldn't exist without any of the three.
That's
How do you
true.
sleep at night knowing
Well,
that?
knowing that the director has to deal with all of them, not me, that helps.
Right.
The script had its own challenges, but I had the advantage that Ang was the one who was going to have to figure out how to make the water and the animal and the child work together at the same time. So I left when shooting began, the day shooting began, and came back for the editing. So I took a nice vacation when the things were at their most difficult, I think.
Mhm. So I read something in the press notes where you said that the only way you could figure out to adapt this material was to tell a story about a story. Uh,
Yeah, well, and I also think that goes kind of the heart of the themes of the book. We were searching for the framing device of the book. We could of the film. We could have told it from the point of view of the young boy who had just been rescued by the Japanese investigators, or we could have told it sort of in real time, going through until we reached the end. But ultimately, this is a film about stories and how they impact people's lives and how stories help people get through their lives. And you can kind of look at Pi's journey in any way you choose. You can kind of interpret it the way you would interpret a fable or something like that. So we wanted that distance, that time that had passed between the actual event and the retelling of the story. So we latched onto something that was in the book already, and that was that the book was being written as though it was something that actually happened to Jan Martel, that um, uh, he had met this man who told him about Pi Patel, and he searched him out and heard this incredible story. So that became the framing device for the film.
mhm. And talk to me about your collaboration with Ang Lee. What did he give you as a director to help you in the writing of this?
Well, this was absolutely the most collaborative process I've ever been involved in. It was wonderful in the sense that Ang called essentially and asked if I wanted to do it, and we met the next night. We talked, and we had the same feeling about what the essential themes of the novel were and what we wanted to do with it. And from then on, every week or 2 weeks, I would write pages or notes or sum up our discussions. We would talk about religion, things we wanted to touch on, ideas Ang had for visuals, ideas for further research. I would go home and play with all of these things. I would send him over some pages, and then I'd come into the city. I live just outside of New York, and he has an apartment there. And we would talk over the pages that I had sent, come up with new ideas, go out and eat huge Chinese dinners, and then I would come back home and I'd write for another week or two. Um, as and as the script progressed, we took trips to India to see all the locations. We met with a survival expert, not by choice. He actually, his name was Steve Callahan, and he actually was shipwrecked and left in a lifeboat floating across the Atlantic Ocean for
Oh,
76
wow.
days. But he got a lot of insights into what that's like. And we went up to Maine and visited with Steve, and he became the survival expert for our film, and also an expert on. He already was an expert on sailing and wind and currents and things like that, and he helped
Hmm.
us to map out the journey. Um, and over the course of about 9 months, we wrote the first draft with first just Ang and myself, and then a researcher getting involved, and then producers, and it grew from there. And then the next year was leading up to pre-production and into pre-production, and I was essentially involved the whole time. It's a huge project,
Hmm.
and uh, Ang had to pre-visualize all of the ocean scenes, where the camera would be, what the boat would be doing, where the tiger would be in relation to the boy. He figured that all out in an animatic rendering, so we could actually watch what he was planning to do for the entire second act, and I could amend the script to reflect what he was doing, and as I made changes to the script, he would change the animatics. So it really was a dialogue as the film developed. And then, as I said, when they actually filmed this, we filmed in Taiwan. In the city of Taichung had an airport in the middle of the city that was being abandoned. They were gonna make way for offices or something, and so it was lying there dormant. And Ang discovered it, and we took it over. And the airline terminal became our offices, and the runway. They began to dig up the runway, and we put a 300 foot long by 100 foot wide wave tank in the middle of the runway, surrounded that with shipping containers 3 high, covered that with a tarp, and that became the shooting environment for all of the water scenes. And then all the other sets were built in airplane hangars and set up in airplane hangars, and it became our own studio in the middle of Taiwan. So once the filming began, all I would have been able to watch, for the most part, would have been a crane moving over a wave tank as a boy, pretended to fight a tiger. That was all the nightmare of shooting that I thankfully had very little to do.
Well, that brings me to another thing I wanted to ask about. When you're sitting there and you're writing, and you are letting your imagination run free, do you try to not let the realities of shooting get in the way of that, or is it inevitable?
Well, especially with the first draft, even a studio, they'll tell you, oh, just whatever you feel, do whatever you're going to do. And to be quite honest, sometimes you don't know how difficult certain scenes are or are going to be. You can rest assured that if you're trying to film on the front lawn of the White House, that it's going to involve either some special effects or some really good permissions. So that's not an easy shot. But oftentimes, you should just take a run at it and see what you can do, and allow others who have more experience at getting locations or figuring out how to do it in CG to figure it out. That said, once you get into pre-production, and someone wiser and more budget-minded than I am goes through scene by scene and says, now, you've got this scene, and then this next scene, they're both going to be really expensive. Can you just do one of them? Can you modify one of them? That forces the writer to actually be more inventive in a way, and I think it sometimes results in better scenes. The thing I always mentioned is there was, leading up to that beautiful sequence that we did in the it's called a tank, but it's different in the Buddhist, in the Hindu temple. Forgive me. That water scene where they float the statue out with the candles and everything. We had that, but leading up to it, we had a scene where they paraded through the streets with that statue, which is a tradition in India, and it's gorgeous. But we were spending our budget on the street scene, and then on them carrying that through the temple, and then on them doing that, and that would have been several days of shooting instead of one night of very intense, let's hope we get it right shooting. And because we focused on that, we put more of the scene into that, and it changed the tone in some ways, but I think it actually helped the scene. Another example was the tiger. Very expensive to shoot. This computer graphic animated tiger that takes up so much of the film. So early on, Ang said, look, whenever you can get him under the tarp, let's say that's his home. That's where he's most comfortable. He likes to be out of the sun. This all made sense, so that he thinks of that as his domain. Well, as we worked, it became apparent that it also was more threatening when Pi got on the boat and he didn't know for sure whether the tiger was sleeping, where he was, whether he was going to leap out at any moment. So we began to use that to our advantage. It became a part of the character of the tiger, that he was hidden and you didn't know what was going to happen with him. So you end up turning those things to your advantage.
Right. Now, getting back to the tiger, as a writer, you're trying to create relationships between your characters, and here you have a film where, for about let's say 60 or 70% of it, the main relationship is between a boy and a tiger.
Hmm.
What challenges does that present to you as a writer?
Well, that's pretty interesting because also we realized fairly early on that we didn't want to turn the tiger into a human behavior kind of cute, the sad eyes, oh, will you love me kind of
Mhm.
adorable kitten. We wanted to keep this very much a real animal behaving in real ways. And that's where that line comes up in the film where the father says to Pi, you look at that tiger and you see a soul. Um, when you look in that tiger's eyes, you're only seeing yourself reflected back at you.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, Richard Parker, the tiger, sort of becomes a different aspect of Pi's own personality as he tries to conquer this the journey that he's on, the storms and the things that he has to confront. Initially, it's his enemy, but because that tiger is constantly there threatening him, it keeps Pi alert and alive. And you could look at this story in a way that Pi, the skinny vegetarian boy, has to bring out the carnivore side in him in order to survive this journey. And gradually over time, he comes to accept that side of himself in just the way that he comes to accept the tiger. He's been raised in a kind of isolation where it's possible to be a spiritual child who doesn't believe in violence in the world and can remain innocent about the harshness of nature and God and everything. But being cast out on this boat with this tiger brings out all of that in him too, and he learns from that um, a greater sense of his own self. And so, in its very real sense, if without Richard Parker on the journey with him, he wouldn't have survived.
Mhm. Can you talk to us about your writing process? Are you someone who wakes up at 8 o'clock in the morning and writes for a few hours, or are you like Hemingway with a bottle of Jack and uh, uh,
After hours, yeah. But I get up. I have a fairly mundane schedule just because I have a family and I want to spend time in the evening with my kids as much as possible. I don't live in Los Angeles. I live in New Jersey. Uh, Originally, just out of the way my life evolved, but now more because the phone doesn't ring in the morning because everyone's still asleep there. I I have an office that I'm in right now. I sit in front of my computer, which I'm talking to right now from about 10 o'clock until 1 or so. I have lunch if my wife's around with her, and I come back in here and sit here and do something until 5:30 or so. And some days I have tons of email and I don't get anything done. Some days I'm just writing, and occasionally I get out of control and I have to work late hours. But for the most part, I try to be Monday through Friday, 10 to 5:30, with a short break for lunch. And I don't feel guilt if I check my email or go on the web to see what's going on in the news occasionally. I'm fairly disciplined while I'm working. If I can get the thing about page count always comes up when you're writing notes about a project. You can write notes forever, and a lot of that is the thinking process, or you read or do research. When I'm actually writing a first draft, if I do 3 to 5 pages, I feel good about myself because that's 20, 25 pages a week. If But I don't try not to beat myself up if I only did 1 page because I sat here. And that is one reason that I'm a firm believer in having a schedule, because if I sit here all day and nothing happens, okay, I tried. I sat, and as long as I wasn't on the web the whole time, I tried. I put in my hours, and I don't have to feel guilty when I go away from the computer at night. But if you do irregular hours and you can't keep track, there's this nagging guilt that you haven't done enough, and you're not going to pay the bills this month or something. Um, so that's my general schedule. I have been known to get behind on a draft that's due and crank out 10 pages or 12 pages a day. That's not fun. That's not enjoyable. And you don't have time to really go back and see if it quite works for you. You just have to go with your gut. But years ago, I read, I think it was Tom Wolfe Jr., who said, I think it was, who said that, you know, he's learned after all these years that he can meticulously fight through 3 pages at a time, or he can crank out 12 with a deadline due, and in the end he realizes there's no difference in the quality whatsoever. It's just your writing. It's just what you do. So,
Right. What was the greatest lesson that you learned from writing this script? Something that
mm-hmm.
will stick with you from here on out.
um, you know, that's true. You know, I think you're the first person who's asked that. Um, which is rare because I've been doing a lot of these talks and stuff. And that's interesting. There are a couple things. I do know that I learned a lot about tenacity, patience and tenacity from Ang, because I'm one of those writers, if you hand me a book and say, make a film out of this, and you give me a deadline, I'll get it done. But if you say, go off and write something, let me know when you're done, I don't know if you'll ever see in more than a few pages, because I tend to want to have the structure to get things accomplished, and approach it in a very workmanlike way. Sitting down with a book that everyone said was impossible to adapt is something I never would have done on my own. But Ang has a kind of placid calm about that, where he says, yeah, we'll do it, let's do it. Okay. Just bring in some pages next week, and you bring them in, and we're hundreds of miles from our final destination, and I know it and he knows it, but he goes, all right, well, that little bit works, let's work on that. And being able to just keep coming back to someone who keeps you on track, on focus, and to say, and to not keep looking ahead at the final destination, but to show yourself that patience. I think I learned a lot about how to do that in my own work now, and I didn't necessarily have that before. We also played a lot with different techniques of writing for the page. We split the page and moved the current day scenes alongside the past tense scenes and shuffled them around in a way. And I had just never looked at writing visually on the page that way before, and I think it did teach me something about how to imagine what goes on screen in a different way, which I wouldn't have anticipated. Yeah, I think those are the main things. I think without that kind of calm from Ang, I would have just assumed, oh, we're never going to get this. He's never going to get it. But he was never daunted. He was never willing to look back, and it happened. So.
Mm-hmm. And finally, if there's one piece of advice that you could give to young aspiring screenwriters out there, what would it be?
If I had one, I've said this before, because this question I have been asked before, and you know, young screenwriters come to me and they ask me questions like, how do I get an agent, or who do I send my script to? And there are as many answers to those questions as there are young screenwriters. I could never have anticipated the journey that I took in order to get where I am right now. And it's a long story. It's not worth going into unless you're interested. But the main thing that I would say is you apply yourself, you keep doing what you do, you keep getting out there and meeting people and talking to people. And there's no one right path. If you're good at what you do, if you become good at what you do, Hollywood will find you. Don't worry about it. They're desperate for good writers. So you learn as much as you can about all the aspects of the craft of filmmaking or theater if you want to do plays. In my early days, I acted, I built sets, I directed plays, I took tickets, I did anything I could to just stay around the world of storytelling. And eventually, someone will give you your chance. If you've moved from the new kid to a trusted member of the team, and you say, "I'd like you all to read what I've written," they'll read it. eventually everyone gets their chance if you're willing to stick around long enough, keep applying yourself, and be patient. And then all that matters is, are you prepared? Have you got the stuff to walk through the door? So the big advice is not how you get your agent, because you probably won't get your agent until after you've sold your screenplay somehow. Instead, it's just keep writing, and then eventually you'll find a way for someone will read what you've written, or come see a play you've written, or ask you for help with a few pages on something, and you'll deliver, and they'll ask you for more, and then one day you'll find you're actually doing what you intended to do. So that's my long answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, this was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure meeting you and talking with you, and so thank you so much for